Welcome to our December La Hora. My name is Cynthia Lawson Jaramillo. I'm the director of the Deed Research Lab at Parsons School of Design. Delighted to see familiar faces and new faces, and so glad you found this space. Since 2007, we have been focused on the artisan sector, concerned with exploitative models and always seeking ways of working within the artisan sector with artisans, with craft that might center artisans' futures and livelihoods, that will celebrate cultures and amazing, typically ancestral skills, and that really, you know, bring joy to our world and the world of artisan communities. Um, this is our monthly online salon that I facilitate, and sometimes we have special guests. And on days like today, there is not a special guest, but you all are the special guests. And so I facilitate a round of sharing and conversation for an hour. And what I typically do is I go around the room, our online room, and ask if you've brought a particular question with you, a project that you're working on that you want feedback on, or maybe a resource that you want to share with the space. So I will do that in a few moments. But today I wanted to start the conversation by sharing a case that I've been following closely that's evolved since last week in Lima, Peru, which is so problematic and serves as an interesting case study from some of what we have studied as new forms of colonization happening within artisan communities. So last week there was an event in Lima intended to celebrate Peruvian fashion, sustainability, and there was a panel on cultural appropriation that included a gentleman who works for Vogue Latin America and a Peruvian fashion designer. And as is typical with designers working in communities other than their own, the designer shared an anecdote of a very well-intentioned exchange that she had in the indigenous community, the Shipibo Conibo community. They're the indigenous Peruvian people in what is now called Peru, in the Amazon region. And she shared that she had arrived to the community with the gift of teaching them design, and in exchange wanted to learn about their community. And when the community said, "We will charge you for this exchange," she then expressed concern and almost outrage, because she, in her words, she said, "Well, we are the same culture. Why are you now going to charge me for knowledge that is also mine as a Peruvian?" Now, I'm Colombian. I present as Irish. I am a Colombian white woman, and that has given me many privileges. I have passports, I speak multiple languages, and I have the resources to join you all today and to be able to move across borders in ways that many indigenous communities around the world do not have these privileges. So that was one really interesting thing that I thought we could discuss today, which is the idea of privilege, and privilege within our countries where indigenous people have been erased from our histories, where we're taught in schools about indigenous people in the olden times as if they no longer exist. And that's certainly my experience in Colombia. I was never taught where indigenous people currently live. It was the history of these lands that we're now on, and not necessarily something current. The Shipibo Conibo community makes gorgeous craft, and in fact, I had the pleasure of seeing an exhibition here in Brooklyn by Shipibo Conibo artist Sara Flores, who recently did a collaboration with Dior, and so Dior now has a handbag with Shipibo Conibo print on the handbag. And I mention that because there is a way for designers and brands to work with artisan communities. And the first step is to enter into respectful dialogue and into, I would say, the first step of before the dialogue is to really account for our own identity, positionality, and potential privileges that we might have as we go into that conversation. But in our academic research, we have learned from anthropologists that introduction of commerce-based frameworks and Western design into communities does not benefit artisan communities. In fact, it has led to their deeper impoverishment and loss of cultural heritage and traditions. Um, but if Sara Flores, who is a very accomplished Shipibo Conibo fine artist and exhibits her paintings in places like Art Basel and galleries in New York City, if she is making a choice to work with Dior to then have some of her artwork printed on a handbag, then we also celebrate that, right? And we celebrate Sara's choice to do that. Um, and I have so many questions about that collaboration. And maybe one day if my paths cross with her again, I could ask her. But I'm curious about compensation. I'm curious about who who in an ancestral indigenous community gets to get compensated for knowledge that in fact is shared.
Mm.
Where does that money go? Is it a central repository? Is it shared across the community? Many questions there. But Dior didn't arrive and take the design and print it on their bags. They worked directly with Sada. And so
Mm.
they treated her in the way that known designers are treated by brands, which is commissioning, crediting, and then the work is centered and celebrated and connected back to the indigenous community. So it was interesting. It's been interesting to follow this in the news. The comments from the Peruvian designer have gone viral on Instagram. There's a very thoughtful analysis that has been posted as well from a Peruvian influencer who's kind of detailing out everything that played out. I'll dig up. There's an article in CNN in Espanol that I can post, and if you don't read Spanish, you can just hit the translate button on your browser in case you want to read more about that. But that's what is in my head. I almost canceled today's session, but then this news came up, and I was like, oh my God, I would love to unpack this with a group of people. So that is what I'm bringing to today's space and welcome your contributions as well. And I'll simply go around my Zoom circle here and ask if you've brought something to the space, and we'll go from there. And I'll facilitate the conversation. Shamika, I just saw you unmuted. Would you like to start?
Sure. um, yeah, there's so much I could say. I could go on and on about. But it's so interesting to hear you talk about the Dior collaboration because I always have questions every time I see something that I know to be a heritage craft being used or misused by big name, by big design houses, especially. And I think what um, in the past, what has bothered me about it, perhaps, is the lack of acknowledgement of what it is. Even not even the, I mean, they might say, "Well, we paid the people," and whatever, but the lack of acknowledgement of what the craft is that they've applied to their specific collection. Um, and so recently, I went to this talk on shibori, and the there's a thank you. So there's a designer who there's a brand called Suzu-san, and the designer works with his father is actually a master shibori artisan in Japan, and he works with people in his hometown, but he lives in Germany, And he's kind of come up with these interesting ways of applying shibori to cashmere and, you know, unusual kind of material applications. Anyway, many, many years ago, he worked with, I believe it was Dior, and they used a very traditional craft that involves heat to kind of create these folded textiles. And so I asked him, I said, did they ever credit or even say where this came from? And he said no. So they made these beautiful dresses, but nobody, unless, you know, unless you had the knowledge, you could look at those dresses and never know what that heritage is or where that craft came from. And so you know, anyway, I'm just curious to see what other people think about that because I feel that is problematic um, in that context. And, you know, in just the lack of acknowledgement. And I do notice that if something is made in Italy by Italian craftspeople, it's often very heavily presented, right? And you know, you hear about it in that way because probably partly because of the Made in Italy campaign that the government sponsored many, you know, whenever that was. But if it is made somewhere in certain other parts of the world, depending where it is, um, it's often obscured. And so there might be a heritage craft that's used or applied to a dress or to something. And, you know, somebody who knows about it will recognize it. But often it's obscured. The origin of it is kind of obscured, which I find problematic. Anyway, that's really all I wanted to say about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Shamika, for sharing that. Um, Maury, do you have a particular thing that brought you today here?
Well, no, nothing in particular other than I've seen you hosting these for so long, and I haven't had the opportunity to join. And I've known you for so many years, and I wanted to, you know, as a instructor at Parsons, I want to, you know, always expand my understanding um, as much as possible of what's important to folks, so that I'm aware when teaching and able to bring in new discussions with students. So mainly I came because I wanted to hear, I wanted to listen. Um, but I have to say, um, with the comments that were just made, it, and I just looked at some of the links, and I just had this visceral kind of um, reaction. I could just, when I looked at that image of uh, the Sarah Flores Dior bag, I I just felt offended. It just felt such a, it just felt almost, I don't think it's too strong a word, but to say it felt vulgar to me, you know, and just to see that logo of the and what to me is very conspicuous consumption, and then thinking about specific craft and cultural appropriation and things like that, it just feels very vile. But yeah, I'm very interested to hear what others have to say, because like you, I present um, as white, um, and you know, I don't want to take up too much space.
Thank you, Maury. Thank you so much for being here and your openness to learn. Laura, did you have a thing that brought you here today?
So a listener um, just wanted to hear people's thoughts on the artisans, and um, it's been on my mind thinking about the way that if somebody wants to create like a fashion company or something, what would be the most responsible way to do it, with the idea in mind of helping the artisans to conserve. And this is something that I kind of like started in my capstone research project. But yeah, I feel that that's something that keeps like running in my mind, and if anybody has any like articles or something that would help me just to keep researching in ways that um fashion and artisans can collaborate in like the modern world, it would be great. Without colonization, obviously.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here. Campbell, I see your hand on Jolly. Let me finish doing the round. You're on mute, Campbell.
Okay, thanks. I came here because I saw an email 2 minutes ago when I walked in the door, and I've enjoyed joining these gatherings in the past when I've had a chance to, and so today was a good chance. Just a few random reactions. I work in the northern Peruvian Amazon, and it's curious hearing about the reference to the Shipibo because they are primarily from an area called Pucallpa, and there are many communities, many clans, but you find a number of Shipibo artisans who have moved to Iquitos basically because they're very good entrepreneurs. So they can sell their crafts much more easily on the streets in Iquitos than they can just staying in their villages back in the Pucallpa area. Those Shipibo designs have pretty much, I don't know what the proper phrase is, the cat's out of the bag. You find those Shipibo designs on everything. You find them on mass printed telas, fabrics, whatever. So I frankly would not want to try to deal with that because it would be such a can of worms trying to have any possible realistic attempt to say, well, who has the right to share these designs? Because it's out there in the public. Every Shipibo artisan does it their own way. It's their own clan, their own modifications. So I don't know who would have a quote legitimate right to legitimize anyone else using any of those designs.
Yeah.
So that's just my thought on that. We had an interesting situation when we were starting, when I started working with some native communities in the Ampiacu area. Our first attempt to create new products that people could sell beyond what they were already doing was to do some belts and some guitar straps. And so most of those designs were ones that the artists came up with on their own based on their interpretations of the patterns of jungle snakes. So it was basically using people's own skills, but their own creative input to come up with those designs. But there was one woman who said, well, I'm going to do a traditional Bora design. And so she did this sort of zigzag pattern and for some time insisted that none of the other artisans could use that pattern because it was, quote, her tradition. Well, I found later that same design is all around the world. It's been used in India. It's been used in many, many cultures. So, while I had on the one hand this one artisan saying, well, this is, quote, my design, it's my culture, my group. In fact, it wasn't. It had come from many other places. So how is one supposed to treat that kind of situation? So frankly, I really enjoy working with indigenous artisans, but we have almost intentionally stayed away from trying to incorporate native graphic designs in these things because these issues are so hard to try to figure out.
Yeah.
So our challenges are much more of the more mundane marketing aspects of, we've been working with artisans to try to build up their markets because what they most want to do is to generate more income from sustainably harvested plants. So that's our focus. And our focus, where we've got most success now, is working with the artisans to make woven birds, woven butterflies. So it's just, again, sort of starting with photos of those actual animals and then working with the artisans to make them as realistic looking as possible so that people can appreciate the nature that is coming from their creative hands. And we can therefore avoid these very tricky issues of cultural appropriation.
Thank you so much for detailing out that strategy to us. Let me keep going around the circle and we can come back to some of what you raised. Mar, did you have a particular thing that brought you here today? You're muted.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My English is not very well. Is
Okay.
possible talk in Spanish?
You can talk in Spanish and I'll translate.
Okay, thank you. Bueno, I live in Guatemala City, and I'm working with woman group artisans in different parts of my country. Um, ahora, y realmente estoy bueno, me interesaba mucho saber y entender un poco el pensamiento de otras personas que no viven en mi país, porque el problema de la apropiación cultural en Guatemala es muy grande. Y creo que Cynthia recuerda su visita a Guatemala y recordará muchísimas personas que tuvimos la oportunidad de estar en el foro, y muchas de las personas que exhibieron algunos productos o sus marcas trabajan con grupos artesanos, pero no trabajan desde la parte de inspiración de la cultura indígena maya, sino desde la apropiación en muchos casos. Y es muy preocupante ver que muchos de los productos que Guatemala produce a nivel de diseño de producto artesanal se basen en la apropiación cultural de los diferentes grupos indígenas de Guatemala. Entonces, mi interés es también poder entender cómo otras personas fuera de Guatemala entienden qué es apropiación y entienden qué es inspiración, porque yo me puedo inspirar en el trabajo sobre todo de las mujeres que producen textiles, o que producen cerámica, o que producen metales, pero como inspiración. Y básicamente por eso me interesó muchísimo entrar en el foro, y creo que cada opinión es muy, muy valiosa. Y estoy en completo desacuerdo de democratizar la simbología que tienen en muchos casos los textiles. Y
Great. Let me finish the translation here. Against democratizing. ¿Estás en contra de democratizar? ¿Cuál fue la última frase?
sí,
Democratizar.
que democratizar la simbología.
Ah,
Porque en Perú, bueno, vi un poquito de lo que pasó en Perú, y bueno, me sentí bastante molesta cuando esta persona que trabaja para Vogue Latinoamérica dice de forma tan amable que, bueno, que si no fuera por la diseñadora que está presente, los artesanos que trabajan con el grupo de la otra persona no tendrían trabajo, y esto, o estarían muriéndose de hambre. No recuerdo muy bien cómo fue la frase, pero me pareció o sea, tan grosera, creo que como diseñadora, yo soy diseñadora industrial, creo que hay que tener mucho cuidado cuando tú te acercas con un grupo artesano a trabajar, porque me pareció, en Perú me pareció que decir que tú te acercas a trabajar con un grupo artesano y que el grupo artesano va a aprender de ti, sí va a aprender de ti algunas cosas, pero tú, o sea, tendrías que tener muchísimo y toda una vida para poder entender toda una cosmología que ellos manejan a nivel cultural. y han manejado por generaciones. Entonces, creo que hay que tener como mucho cuidado cuando tú trabajas con artesanos. Creo que hay que dignificar el trabajo de generaciones.
Gracias, Mar. Escribí en el chat, traduje a inglés mientras hablabas. So I typed in the chat as Mar was speaking, and if you're watching this on YouTube, this will be in the description of this video, so you can go there and read as well as Mar is speaking. But yeah, really invaluable. So nice to connect. So the trip that Mar was referring to, I had an opportunity to travel with a colleague from Parsons as part of a group of designers that included Donna Karen and Carmen Busquets, Livia Firth from the UK, some other designers based in New York, the person who runs the CFDA, the Council of Fashion Design for America. So it's a group of us who traveled to Guatemala to learn about the artisan sector and participate in a conference that was organized at the Textile Museum Ixchel called Guatemaya. And Maru was one of the wonderful Guatemalan designers that we met on the trip. So nice to reconnect here. And thank you for sharing your perspectives and your experiences. Let me keep going around the room here. So Rosella, do you have a particular thing that brought you here today? Oh, I see it in the chat. Working as a researcher in a university, have a pure passion for traditional craftsmanship and fashion. No worries that your audio won't work. Some resources to check out. Yes, we are huge fans of the Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative started by Monica Moisen, a Hungarian attorney who's been working also has done a lot of work in India. And in fact, I'll drop in the chat. We did a study group with 200 million artisans, and one of our sessions focused on intellectual property and the issues around intellectual property. So I'll make sure to put that there as a resource because I think it connects to a lot of the conversation today. Hechopornosotros.org. Great. Rosela, can you share what country you're based in? Tell us in the chat. Oh, in Malta. Wonderful. The beauty of Zoom, it shrinks the world even further. Thank you for being here. Anjali, you have a particular thing that brought you here today?
I saw the message just 5 minutes ago, like 15 minutes back to 10 p.m. Like it's 10 p.m. here. So, yes. I had a very good chance of meeting Merida yesterday. We had a new school alumni chapter meet in India, first alumni meet here. So we started a India chapter meet in India. So she's on a trip to India, meeting all the alumni. So we kind of discussed you also. She knows you very well, as so we were discussing what you are talking about, the privileged group. People from India must have known that there was a very renowned wedding that took place this year. That was Nita Ambani and Mukesh Ambani's son wedding, where Nita Ambani wore a sari worth crores of rupees, okay, designed by Manish Mehrotra or somebody. But again, the same thing as was mentioned by many people here, that the artisans here who make the design, who actually are the people behind making it, are never credited for it. They sell it for, and the people buy it for crores of rupees, but the people who are actually doing the hard work and who are actually making it are not the ones who are credited with it. They are never credited for. So the privileged class who get their name and the people who are recognized never go ahead and tell about who are the makers, who are the people behind it. And I'm really worried that these people never want their children to go in this field. So n- they all are wondering about uh, like it makes me wonder that will we have this so much, there is so much, yesterday also we were discussing about it, there's so much craft and there's so much history and craftsmanship in India that 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 is really pure artwork basically, but because of the poor pays and poor acknowledgement of their art, is it going to die with this generation or what? Because because they are getting poorly paid, so obviously they are wanting their children to either go for some other education or something else. So they're not passing it on to their children, basically. So nobody wants to go ahead and have their children do this work. So somehow it will die its own death, basically. You will find lesser and lesser people along the way. And it feels like a sad thing. It feels really sad to see this thing dying. Uh, it's like how to save it is my uh, I really want to do something about it as um, part of this group, because this is what all it's not only about India. In China also I heard about this place where only few artisans are left who do the actual Chinese embroidery, and there is a South Korean place where these South Korean embroiderers are present, but the original technique of hand embroidery is somehow dying day by day. So,
Yes. Yes, it's dying.
and
I agree. It's dying. The artisans with whom we've worked in Guatemala and in Colombia, their hopes and dreams for their children are not that they become artisans. They are that they finish school, that they hopefully find an office job,
Yeah.
because they have had such hard lives that they associate being an artisan with having a hard life, and they don't wish that for their children. However, we also cannot impose models or solutions for skills or cultures to not die that rely on people having less privilege than our own. And that is the conundrum that we really focus on when we speak with designers or brand founders. Or when was the
Yes.
last time that you woke up concerned that you weren't saving your own culture, or that the papyrus no longer exists, or we've had so many, if we look at the history of the world, so many technologies have died, and there's sadness in it. And what might we be able to do to address our sadness? We can certainly come here and mourn together. But the concern is imposing models on those who hold those cultures.
Mm.
And I think this connects back to where we started, Campbell's important question of who has a legitimate right to use a design. And that is such a great question. I have no idea. I'm simply not going to use it. Right? Which is kind of Campbell, you're sharing, we're not going to go there because there's so many issues. And I think that's a really interesting approach, to simply like, let's just not go there and allow indigenous communities their own ways of governance, their own commitments to sharing knowledge, family. Some of them is family lines, some of it is community, some of it is clan based. You know, there are various structures of governance, and I think we can really respect that. And sure, there are many creative coincidences. So there's fine artwork that we'll see look similar to another fine artwork in another side of the world. Um, is that appropriation? Not necessarily, because as artists and designers, we can think of ideas in isolation from one another that might end up looking similar. The challenge is, and Mar used this word, inspired by. Is that okay? Is it okay to be inspired by a community or a culture to which you don't belong? I guess it's okay. But where is the border between inspiration and appropriation? Um, and that's where it's really problematic. Laura, you were asking for resources on how to go about this. And I think that with whomever you want to work, it's really a matter of trust building, of time, of working together, and also of accepting that, you know, I don't have the time, or I don't want to go live in community. I really want to have the life that I have, and therefore let's focus on other ways. But yeah, I mean, embroidery, hand embroidery is dying. You know, we're competing against machines, against rapid production, against these cycles of production that are established by brands like Zara that then feed into the cycles of consumption that we all feed into. And I was writing a recent book chapter that critiques why fair trade is not useful for artisans, for their own livelihoods, and the ethics of that. And I learned about something called the ethical purchasing gap. And the ethical purchasing gap is the gap between people who say, I want to be a sustainable or ethical consumer, and people who actually spend their money in that way. And the gap exists for two primary reasons. The one is price, and the other is a perception of inferior quality. So when surveyed, people will say, absolutely, I want to be ethical with my purchases this holiday season. And then they're surveyed again, how many fair trade products did you buy, as an example? Oh, I ended up not buying them because either they were too expensive, or I assume because of that label psychologically that it's going to be less quality than if it was some other label or brand. And so that's really interesting. How do we hold ourselves accountable for the roles that we play within the larger ecosystem if we were to map it for the artisan sector? And, you know, questioning who is the underlying labor. A lot of, up to 60% of fast fashion garments are now made in part by artisans, because those are the jobs that come to their community. So they can't sell all of their beautiful craft, all of those gorgeous skills that we're concerned are dying. They end up participating in a very small part of a very large exploitative supply chain that pays them very little, but at least they have some income. Maury, I see your hand.
I just wanted to comment that we've also seen a move away from people even using the terms that relate to artisan or craft. I think one of the biggest examples here locally in New York is the Museum of Art and Design, which was founded as the Museum of, I think it was called Contemporary Craft. And they was all about artisan work and craft. And then they changed their name to the Museum of Art and Design. And I think that specifically, you know, really says something about when we use language, because language matters, and the type of words we use to describe something. There was this move away, like you said, Cynthia, the idea of, you know, being something inferior. It almost became like craft became kitschy and unprofessional and not serious. When, if we really think about the roots of the terms and how they evolve, art and craft, and then to just throw it away and call something design, then it's no longer can be seen as craft and artisan. How do we respect and acknowledge that?
Such a great example. CCA used to be called the California College of Arts and Crafts. Also, it was CCAC, now it's just CCA, and really emphasizing art and design. Our friends at Nest, which is a known organization here in the US that works within artisan sector, moved away from artisan in their mission language and instead focuses on hand worker or hand emphasis on handmade and not artisan. And it's again about these like perceptions of language and what we mean by them. And then we've discussed in prior laudas the everything is now artisanal, so I can go to my local corner store and buy a mass-produced sliced bread that is called artesano. And it's, you know, it's in Spanish and it's supposed to be something fancier than what it actually is. Yeah, thank you for that. Shaumika?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond a bit to what Anjali was saying and also what you were saying. And I think, I mean, I think there's a broader problem, which like, nobody can solve, but of, capitalism and coupling craft with income, right? So obviously a craftsperson in this day and age wants to earn money from what they're doing because they need to live and they need enough money to live and they need enough money to live in the society we have. But something that I find interesting and sort of see parallels in even as a designer, as an architect, because is that, one is obviously if there's better investment, and in a place like India, theoretically there's supposed to be investment in the craft sector through government initiatives, not just NGOs, right? That's what it's supposed to be. There are weaving centers, like there are weaver service centers in every big city, in every state. There are these resources. How well they're working, I can't say, but there is a Ministry of Textiles, and part of that was it was set up to kind of support especially textile crafts. And the perception of craft in that context is different from the perception of craft in this context. But anyway, I think what I'm trying to get at is if there is a solution, it's either through the decoupling of making and income, or it's through investment into making by hand. It's like either extreme. But I find that interesting to think about, just because I can't tell you how many times I keep hearing about how I'm going to become irrelevant and my profession is going to become irrelevant because AI can make renderings. And so therefore, I should figure out what I'm doing with my future. And I find it interesting because on the one hand, I think, well, that's scary and problematic. But on the other hand, I think, well, the joke's on whoever said that, because I will be doing it whether or not I'm getting paid for it, which is a terrible thing to say. And, not something I exactly agree with, really. But the fact is, I can't stop doing it. Like, I would not be able to stop myself from drawing. I would not be able to stop myself from being an architect and, doing other related things. And so I think, do I want to get paid for it? Absolutely. Obviously, I want to get paid for it. But anyway, so I think there's something interesting there because embroidery was not paid for. It was something people did at home in the evening or, whatever, to just repair something or to make something more beautiful or to pass the time. And so I just wonder if, if it doesn't die, then maybe it just becomes something that's part of life in some way. And I don't think that's good because artisans need an income, they need to live. But in some ideal world where they can also have income and spare time, then, maybe they continue to do it anyway because they can.
Yes, I love that premise. And how might we imagine business models that actually center joy or maximize joy for people involved? There was a wonderful article, I think it was in the early pandemic years, that said, "Stop turning your hobby into an Etsy store." And it was pointing out like you're gonna end up hating that thing that you love to do because it's now gonna become this like part of the grind. Um, so yeah, when students approach me and ask, well, how can we help? How can we contribute? What do artisans need? I encourage them to also, because I mainly work with design students or art students, artisans are makers. And in the way that somebody might study fine art but then has a career in something else, the artisans could also be celebrated as makers. And there's such a spectrum of making. And instead of insisting that they only create with the centuries old technique, what if we teach them the latest and greatest making center technologies that we have at Parsons? And why are they needing to be in the static space of making and skills, but we get to evolve the ways we practice? So, there are gaps around education. There's so many underlying systemic issues. There's indigenous, the presence and visibility of indigenous communities in Guatemala, for example, is a huge driver for tourism. So there's a sense of, oh, is the government really not wanting to invest in these communities to develop because then we'll lose that visibility and that attraction, let's say, of tourists. And it's so complex. But yeah, I love that those reflections on how do we have the income sources elsewhere so that the joy stays in the craft. And of course then they're likely to make it. Then it's like their happy place and what they do in community, and then the children are also participating and learning. And so holding those two and not assuming that the only way that artisans can make an income is through the sale of their craft. Like, why is that only the only solution we're presenting? Thank you. Anjali, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah. First of all, I wanted to respond to the question which Mr. Campbell said about owning the design or the like the art. Basically, I think we should be kind enough to share the art. Like mandala art today has become the mm, mandala is now capturing everything, mandala art basically. So it is not it can originate from anywhere, but it can be shared by everyone. It is like what just now Shomika said, that's it is a joyful thing. Like art is a joyful thing and we can share it, so nobody owns anything, like unless and until we put a trademark on it or something like that. I would say it can originate from somewhere, but we can always share it. I saw books on Radha Krishna, that's the deity we in India we worship, but I just now brought those books from US, and they have been designed and done so beautifully in US by a US design like art designer, that I was so attracted towards them that I had to like ask somebody to get it for me, you know. So I'm just saying that it is not owned. Art cannot be owned by anybody. Like it can be shared by everyone. Mandala art today, I can see books, very renowned books in US. It started from a very small town in India, but now it has become the adult coloring book, taking away the tension, and it has become the point of pleasure, basically. So I feel, yeah.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. There might be a difference between, yeah, depending on the history of how this originated. But Campbell, I see your hand, then we'll go to Mar and then Shamika.
Thank you. I didn't know how to raise my digital hand, so
Oh, no
I
worries.
got the real one. I guess I'd like to maybe advocate a bit more for the say the marketing side. When we started working with our community partners in about 2006, most of the artisans in the communities where we were working were making a handful of products, which basically were the evolution of things that had been practical items in the past. And then when tourism became a thing, they started making those practical items with more interesting designs. So I mean that was the connection to the past. But you know, again, when we started getting involved, most of those crafts, those people are having to travel to the city on their own money, selling them to souvenir shops for very small amounts. And basically they were women in the villages who were only making enough to pay for little things. You know, I would ask in the beginning, you know, why are you making crafts? Like, well, I can buy kerosene, soap, salt, you know, maybe a few clothes for my kids. And the men were generating income from other things, you know, mostly being involved in logging, leaving the villages to go work on palm oil plantations, getting involved in the production of coca for the cocaine trade. And as our work has progressed and created new opportunities, what we've seen happening is that the women who have been able to sell more crafts to us, as well as improving the diversity and quality of crafts that they can sell to tourists, they have been getting more income. Their status within their family, their status within the community has been growing because they are now seen as serious economic players in their families and their communities. And as opportunities have grown, we've now seen men making choices to actually join their wives and help their wives making these things, or becoming artisans themselves, because they're seeing that the opportunities to make and sell crafts when they can do it at a reasonable profit is better than going out in the forest and, you know, risking their lives in these horrible logging operations and other opportunities that are just less attractive at this point in time than making and selling crafts. And, you know, the key to the success isn't them continuing to try to sell the same things that they were making and selling 30 years ago. It's adaptation. It's being aware of what the market is interested in, and yes, adapting their traditional skills, but not being tied to trying to sell a few traditional products that people frankly will only want to buy in a museum shop. So, you know, I appreciate that some artisans want to make things because they feel good about it. But again, the vast majority of people that we work with They enjoy doing it because it's the best way for them to improve their livelihoods. There are a few people who call themselves artists who do paintings, but frankly, there's only like one out of several hundred people who are painters who have made it a good living at it because they have adapted and they've been invited to do exhibitions in Lima, exhibitions in Europe. All the other painters are still churning out the same mediocre quality wildlife designs and trying to sell them to tourists who frankly don't want to buy that many of them.
Thank you, Campbell, for that snapshot there. So let's go to Mar, and then we'll wrap up with Shamika's comment, and that'll be it for today's La Hora. Mar?
Bueno, creo que con lo que se ha ido mencionando, yo quería comentar algo en lo que estuve trabajando hace un par de años, y era, bueno, los textiles en Guatemala, o el textil en Guatemala, la simbología del textil de Guatemala, nació a partir de la necesidad de los indígenas en relación a la conquista, al poder preservar su forma de lenguaje y todas las creencias. Y eso fue lo que se plasmó en los textiles que han ido sobreviviendo durante años, durante siglos. Entonces, yo decía, bueno, entiendo que las nuevas generaciones no están tan interesadas o digamos tienen intereses muy diversos acerca del textil, por ejemplo. Las nuevas generaciones ya no visten como vestían sus padres o sus abuelos, ya no están interesados en desarrollar el textil con las técnicas de telar de cintura o de telar de pie, justamente por lo que se mencionaba, la percepción de las nuevas generaciones en relación al trabajo artesanal es de tener pues una vida que no va, que les va a seguir dejando con las carencias que se tienen en el área rural, sobre todo. Sin embargo, como diseñadora también siempre me he preguntado cuál es el compromiso que tengo que tener si yo quiero trabajar con comunidades, si quiero trabajar dentro de los procesos artesanales de las comunidades. Creo que es un compromiso a largo plazo, es un compromiso en donde como diseñadora tienes que vincularte afectivamente con las personas, tienes que entender su forma de vida y tienes que entender todo el contexto social en el que ellos viven. Así que me preguntaba específicamente para este proyecto que yo quería hacer, si así como sus antepasados tuvieron que preservar su lenguaje por medio de la creación de símbolos y lo plasmaron en el textil, ¿qué pasaría si las nuevas generaciones, con nuevos intereses, también crearan sus propios lenguajes a nivel gráfico y se pudieran plasmar también en textil? Entonces, los primeros acercamientos que tuve, porque realmente es un proyecto que no he concluido, fueron bastante interesantes porque se pudieron integrar 3 generaciones. La generación de las abuelas, que son las que tienen toda la información de cosmología y de simbología, las madres y los hijos, y crear entre las 3 generaciones nuevos símbolos. Y realmente fue bastante interesante los resultados a nivel de creación de símbolos para incorporarlos en nuevas textiles. Entonces creo que realmente el compromiso como diseñadores es involucrarnos a totalidad para encontrar con las personas que tienen bueno, que ya traen por generaciones un arte o que traen todas las técnicas, el poderlas de alguna manera revitalizar, pero desde nuevas intervenciones.
Mil gracias, Mar. I traduje en el chat. I translated in the chat as Mar was speaking. Thank you so much for sharing that story. So, Shaumika, you'll have the last word in today's.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I know we're over time, but I just wanted to say a couple of things. I think one is just in response again to Anjali and to some extent Mar and others, that I think context is really important, which I'm sure we all realize that when it comes to appropriation in the context of India or the South Asian subcontinent or something like that, I think it's very different to, let's say, Guatemala, and because I think, that in that context, depending on which population, the majority is still there, if that makes sense, and running the country or whatever. But I also think in the Asian and European context, there's been so much trade and exchange that kind of pinpointing a certain symbol or motif to a specific place might be less easy than in some other contexts where there hasn't been as much exchange or trade. But I think in either context, adapting is common, and I think adapting is something that has always kind of happened and will probably continue to happen. And then I just wanted to quickly share also that I made craft part of my studio that I taught this semester, in the interior design studio. So they were actually designing within the Noguchi studio, they were designing a space for an artisan who was a finalist in the Loewe Craft Prize. So they were kind of centering the artisan, and that was an interesting project, and it was nice to kind of have each of them look at a specific artisan and understand what they were doing and how they were making things. But so I don't know if everyone's familiar. Probably a lot of you are familiar with that craft prize, but yeah, it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting thing that has the potential to at least center craft and make it important. So.
Excellent way to wrap up. Thank you for sharing that link in the chat. Yeah, the idea of craft prizes is very interesting. Interesting way to continue to encourage craft, to encourage experimentation, to encourage what Mar was describing as a revitalization. It's an interesting way to go about it. Well, that is the end of La Hora. We always need a bit more than an hour, but it was lovely to have you join me today. I look forward to future conversations. We will not be meeting in January since the first Wednesday of the month is New Year's Day, and probably will be resting, or hopefully resting. But I look forward to seeing you in February. And if you are not yet on our mailing list, feel free to send me your email address or follow us on Instagram at DeedLab. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.